I shared this with our staff about 4 years ago in a staff retreat. It was very revealing, the response that began to emerge among us when we pondered this part to the story. And increasingly, I feel like the Lord has really begun to impress upon us what this really, really means. And so we get into this morning this third great dimension to the Exodus. We've been over all that took place where God said, "I will be the Lord your God," and He proved it, and He revealed His name in the process, and He displayed the means by which He would redeem and bring out to Himself a people for Himself. And then we talked about what it meant to be His people, and the encounter on Mount Sinai. And because He is the Lord, our Redeemer, one who reaches down and takes hold and brings to Himself, it naturally flows that now you will be my people. And this is how you will be my people. And He enters into covenant relationship with them. And that at the heart of that covenant relationship is a relationship to Him above all else. And you've got these 5 vertical commands that if we walk in them, we become like Him, because what we worship is what we become. And if we worship with the one who's like us, we discover truly who we really are. And then that naturally flows out in those 5 horizontal commands. We begin to love other people as we have been loved. And we reflect then the image of God. Now, today, we get into this third dimension to the story in which God says one more thing. When He commissions us with Him in covenant relationship to take us among the nations, He says, "I want to dwell in your midst." Now, I think somehow this is a whole dimension to the evangelical movement that we are yet fully grasping the implications of what it really means. So as we saw last week, when God brought them out, He began to form them as a people, and He taught them in the wilderness. And He gave them very significant lessons through experience. They learned in their experience, as they listened to God and followed His instructions, there was a lesson and something to remember that they needed to become and trust in to become the people of God. And you got this whole thing of bread and water and warfare and administration. Those are very foundational lessons for the formation of a people to be His people. Okay, now, when they become that, they become an expression of God's firstborn Son in community among the nations. And the character and the display in terms of God's own possession, and it's treasured and it's portable, and He's taking it among the peoples. And they function in community as king priests in relationship to the nations. They're a king priest community in relationship to the nations. Rulership and mediatorship. Stewarding that among the peoples. It's the rulership of God, and it's the love and the compassion and the grace and the mediatorship that He is among the peoples to restore and redeem them. Holy. Holy is holy gods, what this means. And it separates us and makes us. Now, we come to this dimension now this morning, where God says in chapter 25, 1 through 8, and if we just read these words, he says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from each man whose heart prompts him to give.'" There's an offering. "These are the offerings you are to receive from them: gold, silver, bronze, purple, so forth." And then he says, "Then have them make a sanctuary, a dwelling place for me, that I might dwell among them." Now here's going to be a huge lesson that God is going to draw his people into, and it has to do with how he longs to dwell among us as he takes us among the nations. And our commission with him is foundationally rooted in his presence that goes with us. And we live out of that, and we steward that as a king-priest nation among the nations. So after those instructions, then, you find the next sequence of the text. God gives Moses instructions of how to make this place. And he's to follow these instructions very carefully, because when you look at this dwelling place, it is a picture and an instruction device for Israel to learn what it means for a holy God to dwell among an unholy people, and how at-one-ment is going to be made. At one with their God. That's the word atonement. It's at-one-ment. So you find the instructions that are given, and then a great crisis emerges in the text, right in the center of this concluding section of Exodus. And it has to do with idolatry that breaks out in the camp, and what happens in the midst of that, and how the author of Exodus draws us into the lesson of what this teaches us. And then you find after that crisis, the tabernacle is actually built, and then the glory of God comes to dwell among his people. So there's a huge lesson right in the center of this, encased in what the tabernacle means for the people of God. So this is what we want to focus on this morning. These are the natural parts to the text. These are the instructions that have the pattern. Then you find a crisis that emerges in the camp at the foot of the mountain. And covenant with God that has just been established is broken, is violated. And so there's a priestly work of Moses coming off the mountain into the camp. And we want to look very carefully at that priestly work. And it's also prophetic. And then he goes back to the mountain. And you find then, at this point, after this, God says to the people, I will send an angel ahead of you, but I will not go with you, for I fear that my anger might burn out among you and destroy you. Now this is a very significant moment in the life of Israel. And Moses, hearing those words, "My presence will not go with you." And then you find this very interesting text. And I continue to ponder this. I've pondered it for 4 years. It's just a picture. And it's almost like it's out of the blue. And it's put in here and described what happens when Moses goes into a tent of meeting. And then we actually hear something, the conversation of what goes on in that tent. And then he comes out, and after that conversation, God changes his heart and mind and says, "My presence will go with you." And then Moses goes back up the mountain, and covenant is renewed, and he comes off the mountain, and his face is brilliant. It's shining with the glory of God. And then you find they build the tabernacle, and the glory of God comes and fills it. And then he takes them. He dwells among them as they go in the land. So right in the center of this is our lesson for this morning. It's very, very significant. You think for a moment just about the pattern of the tabernacle. It is constructed with very careful design. God gives dimensions. It's kind of intriguing. This is to be 100 cubits in length, and this is 50. So you got 50 and 100. Then there is a holy place, and that is 10 by 20. And then you've got a Holy of Holies, 10 by 10. Notice all the tens in all of this. You've got an altar of sacrifice when you enter this tabernacle, having to do with a burnt offering, all consumed. Then you've got a wash basin of cleansing. Then you go into this holy place, and you've got a testimony in here. You've got the bread of the presence. You've got a lampstand, and you've got incense altar. And then you go into the Holy of Holies, and in the Holy of Holies you've got a picture of an ark with the presence over that ark. And in that box you have a testimony of Aaron's staff, and you have a jar of manna. Now, you just think about all of this, and we don't have time this morning to get into it, but it's to be an instruction device among the people of God of what it means to come into the presence of God. And for God to dwell among you. So this goes with the people now. So let's look at the crisis and how it emerged, beginning in chapter 32, beginning with verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us." Now listen to these words. Moses is up on the mountain. He's taking a long time to come down. And so what do the people do? I think out of impatience, with something of a rebellious heart, they say, "Come, make us gods." Whenever we find in the biblical text those words, "Come, let us make." This is what was said at Babel, say, "Come, make us gods who will go before us." It's a cry in the heart of a human being that he has a leader. And who will be that leader? Who will you trust? As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So out of the community begins to emerge their choice for who will lead them. And it says, Aaron asked them, "Well, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." It's intriguing that that would be what Aaron would advise the people, because these people were God's what? Treasured possession. The word treasure there in the Hebrew means portable, like jewelry. And now they're going to take the very thing that God looks upon them as in relationship to himself, and they're going to take off all their gold jewelry, and they're going to give it now. And look what they do. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioned it with a tool. They made it. They formed it. A calf idol. Where does that come from? This comes from their days in Egypt. This was one of those Egyptian gods. So notice what happens in the heart. These people are not fully cut off or separated from that which they had been immersed in. When they crossed the Red Sea, there was a great separation physically from the Egyptians. There has yet to be a separation from what was in the heart when they lived in Egypt. And here it begins to emerge when there's a delay of Moses coming down the mountain. And so they fashioned that calf idol, and they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, it says he built an altar and put that altar in the face of the calf idol. You've got very important terminology here where you've got a mixture now of Aaron putting the face of God in the face of a calf idol. And the word face is very important in this whole story. Remember at the burning bush, when Moses was in the presence of God, it says at that point, he so feared that moment, he turned his face because he couldn't look. And now in this story, over and over again, you're going to find Moses and the encounter with God and the significance of face to face. Here, the altar is put in the face of the calf idol. This is a mixture of idolatry, and it's put right in the face of an altar to Yahweh. Tomorrow, he said, there will be a festival. It's interesting. What we worship is always expressed in what we celebrate. Celebration and worship go hand in hand. And here a festival is instituted. The next day the people rose up and they sacrificed burnt offerings. Just imagine sacrificing burnt offerings in the face of a calf idol. And afterward they sat down to eat and drink, and they got up to indulge in revelry. And this would just be an unbridled expression of human corruption. Then the Lord said to Moses, and this is going to lead us now into a priestly and a prophetic work. God says to Moses, and listen very, very carefully, he said to Moses, go down now because your people, notice the words here, your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt. Does your heart not ache with the heart of God? Now it's Moses, these are your people. They're not mine. Whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They've bowed down to it, sacrificed to it, and have said, these are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt. I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses. They're stiff-necked. Now leave me alone so that my anger might burn against them and that I might destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. Now you see Moses in his response right here. He says these words. But Moses sought in prayer the face of God. Now the NIV translation will say sought the favor of the Lord. In the Hebrew it says he sought the face. He sought the face of God. O Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt? with great power and a mighty hand. Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on this people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. It says Israel, not Jacob. Because Jacob's name was changed from Jacob to Israel because he contended with God and he overcame. And here is Moses contending before God. Imagine saying to God, turn, turn, turn. But Moses stands in the gap as a priest and he pleads, turn, turn, turn. Amongst a rebellious, idolatrous situation. This is ultimate priestly work. Yeah. And then it says, then the Lord relented. He did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. So Moses turned and he went down into the camp. And as he got on the outskirts, and then it says he took with him the tablets of the testimony in his hands. And then it says these words, they were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Notice the emphasis. This is the work of God. This is the writing of God on these tablets. This was the covenant that God had longed for his people, and Moses is taking it as a testimony down into the camp. And when he gets on the outskirts of the camp, it says, he heard a noise of the people shouting, and he said to Moses, Joshua said to Moses, there is sound of war in the camp. But Moses replied, it's not the sound of victory and it's not the sound of defeat, but it's the sound of singing that I hear. Now this is important words. It's as if the people of God who are in covenant with God that he's taking in among the nations, this is a people who contends with the throne of God to exercise the authority of God to confront corruption on the face of the earth. And it's holy war in the good sense. We're stewarding his authority. And it's conflict with the kingdoms of this world. And we will come in as the least and the one who suffers in the midst of that conflict. But here is a description of God's people that are neither in victory nor are they in defeat. They are not in the war anymore. They are singing. They're singing in revelry. That is corruption to the core. In the camp, when Moses approached the camp, saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hand, breaking them to pieces. And he took the calf idol and he broke it and ground it into dust. And then he turned to Aaron, what did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin? Do not be angry, my lord, Aaron answered. You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, where is he? We don't know. So I told them, whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off. They gave me the gold. I threw it into the fire. Out came a calf. Boy, if that is not a lame, no responsibility. There's nothing I could do. I stand by and this happened. Moses saw that the people were running wild, that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. They were in defeat. They cannot stand before the enemy. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And all the Levites rallied to him. And then he went and he purged the camp. There is a separating those who are for the Lord versus those who would worship the calf, and a purging of the camp, the great separation that occurs. But then the Lord said to Moses at this point, the next day Moses said to the people, you've committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. This great work of the priest. Now perhaps I can go up and make atonement. So Moses went to the Lord and said, oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They've made themselves gods, but now please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book. Just ponder those words. Forgive them, Lord, or blot me out of the book. There is complete sacrifice in that statement of a priest for the sake of his people. Blot me out of the book. The Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you, but I will not go with you, because my anger might burn out and consume and destroy you. My presence will not go with you. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn. No one put on any ornaments. The Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments. I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. I think there's a lot of symbolism in these ornaments and these things that they take off now in mourning. They lay them down. Then we enter into this center little picture. Ponder this picture with me. It says that now Moses used to do this. He used to take a tent and he pitched it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. So this was outside the camp. Anyone inquiring of the Lord, let's see, I have a picture of this. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. Whenever Moses, I've got these words here, whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose up and they stood, everyone at his tent door. And he watched Moses until he went into the tent. And then it says, when Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud came down and stood at the door of the tent. And the Lord spoke with Moses. Then it begins to repeat itself. Although something is significantly emphasized. This is kind of a Hebrew way of speaking of something. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the door of the tent, all the people rose up and they worshiped. Here they rose up and they stood. Now they rise up and they worship, every man at the tent of his door. And then it concludes, the Lord spoke with Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his servant Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Now it's just a few verses, and it's like a picture is being painted. And it's a picture of one who's going out. He leaves the tent and he goes out to the presence of God. And he enters into that tent and he speaks with God face to face. And notice what the community does as that happens. And then, after this little picture here, and it's almost like this doesn't even fit into the story. It's just like the author is saying, hey, this used to be a pattern with Moses among us. And he would go out to this tent. Let me ask you this. Moses developed a regular practice of setting up a meeting place with God. Because of this story, 4 years ago, there's kind of a place in my backyard underneath a little canopy that's all broken down. But that's my tent of meeting. Oh, how many times I've gone out to that tent of meeting just to sit in the presence of God and ask Him. Plead with Him. Stand before Him. Listen to Him. Do we have a tent of meeting? It needs to be set apart. Sometimes I find I can't do it in my ordinary places. I've got to have some place that is the only thing I do there is meet with God. It was a place outside the camp, disconnected, set apart. It was a place where the cloud came down and Moses talked with God face to face. We just need to ponder that intimate picture. And in the Hebrew, they love to picture it as face to face. Face to face. And then Moses drew the community into looking at God. I think this picture draws us in. It draws us into that place and that relationship that Moses had with God. And we are invited into it. It's just like Joshua. Imagine Joshua, who spent all those days in that tent. God was preparing a man in the tent of meeting. And why in the world does it make note of the fact that Joshua did not leave the tent? It's telling us something. It's telling us something significant. All right, now we get drawn into something of the conversation. This being the whole structure to the account, after the tent of meeting, it goes back to this whole issue of the presence of God and the journey that is ahead. God said here, I will not go with you. Now, notice what happens in chapter 33, verse 12. It's like all of a sudden the conversation picks up. And I can only imagine that this is something of what went on in that tent of meeting with Moses in response to God saying, I will not go with you. Moses said, you've been telling me, lead these people. Here's the text. You've been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Who will go with us? You have said, I know you by name. I know you, Moses. You have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so that I may know you. That relationship. Lord, you know me. I know you. I long to walk in your ways. And then the Lord replied, after these words, okay, Moses, my presence will go with you. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Presence and rest in what God is leading the people into is what God says he desires here. And Moses has pled for it, and now God says, okay, I will go with you. Then Moses said this, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? This was to be the distinguishing mark that would be a testimony among the nations above all else. There is something about the presence of God among these people. Can that be said of us? Yeah. What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. And then Moses turned and he asked one more thing. And this is such an amazing thing that Moses does. I just continued just to ponder this. And Moses turned to the Lord and he said, Lord, one more thing. Show me your glory. What would you expect God would do? Show me your glory. The Lord said, okay, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. His goodness. I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. Goodness, His very character, encapsulated in His name, Lord, in relationship to us. I'm going to proclaim it. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. There's just the awesomeness of seeing the face of God. You will just see my back, so to speak, because you couldn't stand in my face. I don't know quite what it means, because Moses talked with God face to face. I don't fully understand all this. All it says to me is there is an awesome thing when we encounter the face of God that we cannot stand in just flippantly. Then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. And when my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. There is God's words for show me your glory. We just have to ponder them and the significance of them. The Lord says to Moses, chisel out to me 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets. And you got the closing scene of this whole picture, whereby Moses now goes back up the mountain with stone tablets for God to rewrite the covenant on those tablets. And it says he's back up on the mountain for 40 days, and he had no food and he had no water. Just imagine. And for 40 days, it says then he entered in at the invitation of God to renew the covenant that God longed to have with his people. So Moses chiseled out the 2 tablets. When he came up to the top of the mountain, it says the cloud of the Lord's presence came down, and he proclaimed his name in the presence of Moses. And as he passed in front of Moses, he proclaimed, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love, faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin, and so forth. And then he makes covenant with him. And you see the things that he says in the detail now in the covenant, and it has to do with, be careful that when you go into this land, that you make no treaty with those who live in this land. Well, that's going to be very significant when we get up into Joshua, because they go into the land and they make treaty with others in the land, and this becomes a thorn in their flesh for generations. Do not make cast idols. Celebrate the feast of unleavened bread. And all the experience they had of that when they came out of Egypt. Unleavened bread for 7 days. And then redeem the firstborn of everything among you, because I passed over the firstborn. It belongs to me. 6 days you shall labor, and then comes the Sabbath and rest. Notice these things. These are the details of those 5 vertical commands and 5 horizontal things. And then bring to me the first fruits of the harvest. Celebrate the feasts that I give you. So Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights without eating bread or drinking water, and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. So there's a renewal. It's a second priestly work, and a renewal of the covenant on the mount. And then he comes down off the mountain. And it describes for us, when Moses came down the mountain with the 2 stone tablets in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant. His face was radiant. And when Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of Israel came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave him all the commands the Lord had given him. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence, he took the veil off. And there's great symbolism in all of this, of Moses speaking with God face to face. And notice the significance of what it happens when we enter into the presence of God, what happens to our face when we look into his face. These are Hebrews' ways of trying to explain something that is very, very intimate and very, very significant. And it's dwelling in this presence that we're being drawn into. So how significant is a tent of meeting? I'll just conclude with these words. They're words that often stick with me. Jeremiah chapter 23, in the midst of idolatry, he then says these words. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Do not listen to what the prophets are prophesying to you. They fill you with false hopes. Now these are false prophets. These are people in the midst of idolatry who have not said anything that means anything. They speak visions from their own minds, not from the mouth of the Lord. They keep saying to those who despise me, the Lord says, you will have peace, you will have rest. And to all who follow the stubbornness of their hearts, they say, no harm will come to you. But then these words, but which of them has stood in the counsel of the Lord to see or to hear his word? Who has listened and heard his word? See, the storm of the Lord will burst out in wrath, and so forth. The distinction of a people who dwell in the presence and listen to the word. That's what that song was about. We've got to be a community who listens in his presence, because he's going to lead us in ways that are very contrary to the ways of the world. And will we walk in them with him as he leads us? Amen? All right. I think of these words. The devil took Jesus to a high mountain. He showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their glory. And he said to them, all these things I will give to you if you will fall down and worship me. But Jesus said, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Think about these things. The corruption of idolatry. What does it do with our time, our money, and our effort when we're serving false gods? And false gods can be all kinds of things. People, programs, institutions, things that we're attached to and we serve. And it corrupts us to the core in terms of who we've been made to be. See? Who goes before us? Who or what is really leading us? And why? We have to ponder these things. Do we have a tent of meeting? Is our leading deriving from a tent of meeting? Are we going and pursuing that which God has instructed us in? We have to ponder that. We have to ponder that. We can do all kinds of things. Man is capable of doing all kinds of things on his own. But will we do the thing that God is wanting among us? Amen? Okay. Let's close with that. Any response people have?
The offer that God made to Moses to make the people after his name rather than Israel. What a temptation, what a test. But I think Moses really understood the implication of that, what the nations would see, and the testimony that it would bring. He really wanted God to follow through with what he promised, so the nations would see what kind of God he is. That he is a God who is long-suffering and patient, willing to.
Yeah. Well, we got to get out of the room here pretty soon. So let's end with this. Now, next week we will go into the wilderness. We will go to the border of the promised land and enter into another great crisis that takes place. I'll send an email so that you all know what's the passage, but it's going to be Numbers chapters 13 and Numbers chapter 14. Okay? Alrighty.